my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo, where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course, and it is Thursday, so it means it's time for our Thursday Trends episode. And on the show, my guest helping me break it all down. Man, I'm incredibly proud of this human being. She is the host of the brand new podcast, When You're Invisible, on our very own Cultura podcast network. Maria Diez, how you feeling?
Hey, what's up? I'm so psyched. I'm so happy and honored to be here and feeling so good.
Of course. And for anybody that doesn't know, I was Maria's mentor for a program that she did with iHeart that actually got her this podcast. So we'll get into all that, but that's why I'm incredibly proud to see how far it's come. This is like a year in the making. I'm pretty sure it was probably around this time last year that we were first connected. So it's crazy to fast forward and now here you are. It just came out this week, right? The first episode came out this week.
Yeah, yep. When You're Invisible's first episode dropped on Monday. So we're going to be coming out weekly, every Monday, a new episode, which is cool.
I love it. I love the concept. I want to get into all that. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are going to relate to it. We'll do all that. But first, I want to touch on some trending topics from this, I guess this last couple weeks, kind of. I was off last week for the Thanksgiving holiday. So we're going to dive into a few things. We're going to first touch on what's going on in Georgia with the Senate runoff. I know you got some family in Georgia, so this is near and dear to you and your loved ones. We'll touch on this crazy dinner that Donald Trump had. We'll also, sadly, man, talk about another shooting that happened this time in Colorado at a LGBTQ plus club. It's just devastating to hear. And then on a positive side of things for Mi Gente segment, we're going to celebrate somebody who is, breaking all kinds of boundaries, and a show on Netflix that is not only breaking records, but also giving some much needed Latin representation, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. So we'll do all that. But first, man, let's just get into this BS, this nonsense from the last couple of weeks in a segment we call For the People in the Back.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
All right, so let's start in Georgia. If I'm not mistaken, your parents are from the Atlanta area?
Yeah, so basically my parents moved to Atlanta about 6 years ago. The Atlanta area, they're like 45 minutes out in the southern part of Atlanta. But like Atlanta has become like our another home, right? Like I grew up actually moving around a lot, but my parents moved here. My dad is the head of a research facility for microbiology and food safety. And then I spent part of the pandemic here. So I spent about like 7 months in Georgia. Yeah. And it's crazy. My parents voted for the first time as U.S. citizens in Georgia.
That's amazing. That's actually the worst nightmare of the Republican Party is immigrants getting their first taste of voting, especially in a place like Georgia, which this is fascinating because I do want to get your take. So let's quickly break it down for anybody that's not familiar. So you have a Senate race that's happening that it was too close essentially in the midterm. So they're having a runoff. This is between current Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and then the Trump-backed Republican Herschel Walker. And all kinds of, Georgians, to their credit, are coming out and voting in record numbers. In early voting here, you had 300,000 ballots cast in person in one day, and that topped the state's previous single-day early voting record, which was a little over 200,000. And I think people are recognizing the importance of what's going on right now, right? Because you have somebody like Herschel Walker, who's very obviously just a pawn of the Republican Party, who is just promoting a black man to sort of create this narrative that they are not a racist party. But if you have watched anything of Herschel Walker, he can barely string together two coherent sentences. So it's what's scary to me is the fact that the loyalty to this whole MAGA thing is so diehard that they literally do not care that this man is just an imbecile from what we can see.
Right.
And they're just blatantly voting for him as a Republican and not giving a shit about, him as a potential senator representing a gigantic state like Georgia. So I mean, let's hear your take as somebody who has ties to it. I mean, this has a direct implication on your family, right? The way that this goes. Right. So I'd love to hear your take.
1,000%. It's really interesting because I think like it's heartbreaking that people are voting for a man who clearly isn't, I not to use this word, but also like it's accurate. It's like he's an idiot, like in many ways. Yeah. Like the other day at a rally not far from my parents' place, he was like talking about like in the middle of the rally, just started being like, yeah, like, and then I was watching TV and I was watching this vampire show. Right. And he's like, now I want to be a werewolf because he killed a vampire. Right. And I'm like, how is this? And it's like not even like it wasn't relevant to anything that he was saying. Sure. Like his platform is very limited as well. Yeah. Like it's very clear to me at least. And I think to a lot of Georgians, especially like minority working class Georgians and also like middle class Georgians who are like, no, I do care in like class in terms of like someone who is respectful, someone who's going to care about what I think. Like there's a lot of people who are starting to realize like, nah, I don't know if this is the way to go. Or they're like, oh, holy cow, like someone can actually come into like this spot and be that level of like incoherent, clearly a pawn who's easily manipulated. Right. And like hasn't really like does not tell the truth either. All of these elements that I think is causing people who were either disheartened with the fact that like a lot of people feel like Biden hasn't done enough for the people who did show up, or like feeling like there's not enough like being done for Black and brown communities. So there were like pieces of that, of like pieces of the Georgian community that was like, should I really? And then having someone like Walker, I think like has thrown like the whole, like whether or not like there's policies that we would like to see in place or people would like to see like happen, like they're like, you can't, nothing good is ever going to happen with Walker.
Yeah, I think, I mean, to your point, I think criticism is always fair, right? You know, I mean, I voted for Biden, but I'm not shy about criticizing things that I don't agree with or things I think he should be doing, right? Yeah. And I think I'm trying to look at all of this now with like a lens of empathy and more of being a human rather than just like salaciously, tearing apart anybody who votes MAGA, because I just don't think that that's the answer. And I'm trying to be better at trying to be somebody who hopefully pulls people together. I think for me, if I was speaking to somebody who maybe traditionally votes Republican or is unhappy with the Democratic Party as a whole, I personally would just sort of point out the fact that Republicans care so little or respect your vote so much that they literally think they can just throw this random person out there and you'll back him just because he's Black, regardless of the fact that he obviously is not like mentally coherent in a way that a politician should be, and doesn't actually have any real plans or real policy, right? Like if you are in fact upset with the policy of the Democratic Party, you feel like they haven't done enough for Black and brown, I completely get that, but also this is not the way to go, right?
Yes, agreed.
Like it's obviously it's frustrating. We have a two-party system that dominates, right? And you have to kind of pick one or the other. But again, to me, what Republicans are showing is that they believe their base is dumb enough that they will back somebody like Herschel Walker simply because he has the right skin color, as many of the people who feel disenfranchised in that state.
Yes. And there's like a couple of things that came up when you said that. One, I like remember this phrase is like, not all skin folk are kinfolk.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we know that as people. Yeah. And two, like, I think Republicans are starting to realize that because Trump and Walker have decided that Trump shouldn't come help with the runoff. Right. Like they're like, maybe we should step aside from this one. Right. And like also the fact that like I think there are some Republicans out there where sometimes like they do have some moral compass, some values, and like in terms of like, 1 out of 3 are like Republicans don't support like make America great again.
Sure.
Like, so it's a smaller minority.
Right.
But it's still like people who are like, no, I don't side with that. Like, it's like, I'm going to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
And I think like, Republicans through someone who they were like, they're just going to blindly follow. And the people who support or who are Republican already are going to blindly follow. And what we're starting to see is like, people are hopefully starting to be like, that's no longer something I want to do because we've gone too far.
Right.
And also, I think there's something different about like Warnock actually being part of the community. Like
and a preacher, right? Because he does. That's what I don't understand as well, is that he does check that box of if you are somebody who is religious, which a lot of Republicans are, a lot of conservatives are, he is of the church, right? So why are you ignoring that fact simply because he, is a part of a party that is blue rather than red? And when he's actually all that you're hoping he would be, where Herschel Walker has, many allegations that seem very credible that show that he is not of moral character of people, who are of faith, right? And I think, last thing I would say on it is I would love to live in a world where I can, where I really have to make a choice of if I'm going to vote Republican or Democrat, because I believe that, either candidate is good and I'm genuinely just judging them on the merits of whether or not they're going to do a good job. And I would love to get to a place where we are there, right? That's what I would love to see. That's what sort of I would, push to anybody who is a Republican. And I get plenty of critiques on social media who think I'm like this hardcore Democrat who doesn't see anything else other than that. But I genuinely would love to be in a place where I would have to consider either party because they're both bringing up great points or both great candidates. We're just not there. And you as the Republican base have to take a stand and say, we're not just going to take any asshole that you guys throw at us because he's Republican. Like, give us real candidates and then we'll come back and start voting for you. And I think that that's sort of what needs to happen from that rational portion of the Republican Party that you're talking about, and which we saw kind of in the midterms, but it needs to come out in larger numbers where, people are literally saying, I'm not going to be blind to one party. Even though I've maybe in the past favored a particular party, give me a real candidate before I start supporting you once again.
Yeah, totally. And I think like something that's also really interesting as like a Latina here is like one thing that we overarchingly say sometimes as like quote unquote liberals, Democrats, and from like the north part of the country, like is that like the South is generally conservative. But like something that's really cool is like, yes, Latinos are only 10% of the population here in Georgia. Right. But like, they're like, we care about abortion and having like a woman have the right, like have the options that she would like to have. Like we care about gun safety because we don't want to die. And like, we don't want our community to be in jeopardy. So it's actually, we're seeing like Latinos in Georgia who are voting based off of like actual principles and also like principles that like aren't traditionally conservative either. So I think like sometimes these overarching ideas of like a conservative state or like what's at play is actually more nuanced than the mainstream is portraying it sometimes. Right.
No, I think that is that's a great point. I mean, and kind of piggybacking off of this, we'll touch on Donald Trump because he is in the news once again. And again, this to me, if you are a rational Republican voter, like things like this should really make you take a stance. Like, I'm not going to support this. I'm not going to lend my vote or my time or money for people who, donate. But you had Donald Trump having a dinner with Kanye West, which is already pretty suspect considering Kanye's recent, rants about the Jewish community. But then on top of that, at the dinner, Kanye brings along a known Holocaust denier in Nick Fuentes, who is a white nationalist, has plenty of documented things. If you're on the internet, seeing him talk about white supremacy and all types of racist tropes, and to be fair, you do have some House and Senate Republicans speaking out against Donald Trump and this dinner. You had House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy denouncing Nick Fuentes, who's labeled, of course, like I said, as a white supremacist pundit. And he, the problem I think with a lot of these guys that are coming out like Kevin McCarthy, they always sort of stop short of the real critique, right? They denounce this person in Nick Fuentes. That's the easy target. But they don't then go and condemn Donald Trump for having dinner with this person, right? Because the story is, as Trump says it, he had no idea who Nick Fuentes was. He basically was an unannounced guest that Kanye brought along, right? And whether that's true or not, there's also plenty of people reporting, Kanye himself, that Nick Fuentes was like wowing the former president, I should say, thankfully, and Donald Trump, wowing him with what he was talking about and kind of kissing up to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump was loving it. And the only time that this whole conversation took a turn as far as the dinner they were having was that when Kanye asked Donald Trump to be his vice president in this next presidential campaign, and that's when kind of shit hit the fan. And then Nick Fuentes was critiquing how Donald Trump did not, protect the January 6th rioters, all of the above, right? But regardless of if you knew who this person was or not, it just kind of shows you the sort of pool that he's swimming in, right? And that, to me, should be enough for anybody who's, again, one of these rational Republican voters. Why would you be having a dinner with Kanye West? Why would you not be properly vetting the people that are around him, knowing all that you have to lose if something like this does happen?
Yeah, agreed. It's crazy. I also think I'm like, y'all, we're adults. So if you find out who's at the table, you can leave the table.
Right.
And especially as a man of power, like with power. And it's crazy to me. I'm like, it's also funny when like they critique the person and I'm like, it's a little too late. You've incited so much of this divide too. It's like, you have to do a lot of work. Yeah. And the people deserve like the people they elected to do a lot of work to like fix the damage that has been done. Yeah. Like I'm like, now Mitch McConnell is, using similar language.
Right. Well, that's the thing though. Their Republican Party is now seeing that Donald Trump is not a sure thing. So only now are they then deviating and being okay with kind of critiquing him and not necessarily backing everything he does, right? And that proves the point of, these guys are all full of shit, that they're literally just chasing whoever gives them the best shot of staying in power, right? And now that Trump may not be that guy for them, and they're seeing, chinks in the armor because of that outlandish behavior he's committed over these last few years, they're now then deviating a little bit, but they're still leaving the door open that if somehow, some way he becomes, as powerful and popular with the base again as he was, that they can then hop back on that train. And to your point, yes, these are adults that could leave dinner, right? And Donald Trump does have a team. Like, why would, if these people are unannounced, sure, but why would they not be researching, like, okay, let me just look up who this guy is real quick, just in case this turns left. Yeah. And then like inform him, we should probably leave this dinner because this guy, like, it wasn't, because Trump loved the fact that this guy was kissing up to him. And on top of that, I think the fact that somebody like this has been such a known hardcore Trump supporter once again shows you that Trump is speaking to the values of people who are anti-Semites and white nationalists. And that, again, anybody who's a rational voter, like, you should be seeing that and saying, there's a reason why people like this seem to find themselves in Donald Trump's orbit, right? There has to be a rational reason why people like this keep associating themselves and finding something they relate with in this man.
Yeah, you are the company you keep.
Absolutely.
And I think, like, whether or not Donald Trump knew, like, he has fun with it, and he also loves the support. And also, like, as we've seen through everything that we've noted through like the history of the past, like, since he was elected originally, like, we're noticing, like, hey, this is the repeated company you keep. Yeah. And I think, like, that's also the reality of, like, the pull of QAnon and all of that's out there, is like how crazy this has gotten, and also like how zealous people can be from that branch, and therefore, like, why not stay connected? Because, like, that's who's going to get me elected, or like as it grows, or these conspiracies become more and more accepted, like, maybe this is my way in, and this is the way I can maintain this power and this connection and this. And also, I'm like, I have no doubt you feel similarly.
Sure, right. You just are smart enough to, like, not outwardly say it, but he finds ways to sprinkle it in there, and empower these people. I mean, and this also just kind of speaks to the other story that I want to talk about, which was this horrific shooting that you had at a club in Colorado, which was a LGBTQ plus club, and this is a shooting that was done by a 22-year-old where 5 people were killed, at least 18 people wounded, and more would have been murdered for sure if it wasn't for 2 customers who actually subdued this man while the police were on their way. And those were Richard M. Fierro and Thomas James. Both were veterans that just happened to be there that night and subdued this person. But this guy just goes and they're saying just before midnight on Sunday, November 20th, he opened fire in a club, fatally wounding 5 people. And law enforcement was there within minutes. But of course, when you have guns like this available, sadly, the cops, they're not going to get there in time to save enough lives because, these high-powered guns, these rifles that people are using in mass shootings can kill a lot of people in a very short period of time. And I wanna get to that in the idea of gun reform as well. But first and foremost, this kid, is allegedly the grandson of a congressman in California who's a known MAGA supporter. And even when you see interviews with this kid's father, his main concern was that his son wasn't there because he was gay. He was unfazed by the fact that his son murdered a bunch of people. He was more concerned with the fact that he thought it meant that his son was gay. And it just, when you think about these ideas and why acts of violence are happening to communities of color, or now the LGBTQ plus community is being attacked, and trans rights and all these trans hate that's happening and all these different things, it is started by people like Donald Trump. It is, started by the Republican Party. These right-wing, commentators on Fox News like Tucker Carlson are all stirring the pot. And while they might not be directly telling you to go out and commit these heinous acts of violence, when you have people like this with obvious, mental health issues who can easily access weapons because of the lax laws in this country, and then on top of that are empowered and emboldened because they believe they are at war against an entire community of people because of the media that they're consuming and the people that they're influenced by, it's a perfect, perfect recipe for what we're seeing right now with these violent acts by these right-wing extremists. And it's just, it's horrific. And somebody has to be held accountable up to the media and Donald Trump, because you're seeing these things have all, created an uptick in hate crimes because of somebody like Donald Trump and when he became, the president of the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't imagine what it's like to go out for a night.
Yeah.
And turn it into one of the worst nights of your life.
Yeah.
In a way where your life is completely threatened in a country that is still first world or developed in the world and considered still, right? America still holds on to being the greatest nation on earth. And
absolutely.
To be that would happen is insane. And that it's so triggered by fear and fear based off of things that are completely unfounded.
Irrational.
So irrational that I'm has anyone who is queer, has anyone who is Latino, Black, actually ever made your life worse or endangered? And to feel so scared that you need to literally inhabit a space you've never been in.
Yeah.
And cause danger. And then, a father, I can't imagine a human being who raises a child to be doesn't matter how many people, it's not about killing someone. It's about whether or not you're gay. How disconnected from the world and self and life, human life, to be that matters more than someone's actual life on this planet.
Right.
Is really heartbreaking and dark in many ways. How, my question always is how do we get out of this? And I think that for me has been a huge influence in my work as well, is
sure,
how do we bridge this gap? How does this not be, how do we stop this fear? And yes, I agree. Someone needs to be held accountable. I think many people need to be held accountable all the time. And I think it's an interesting balance of how do we do that as community members as well? If you are someone who doesn't feel that way, but knows people who do, what does that look like? But I'm also so many things about that story and about that event is so heartbreaking and so much to unpack and layered. And the fact that about gun violence and what regulations we have, and the fact that, the types of guns that are often used in these situations aren't capable of being stopped.
Right.
Quickly.
Yeah. I think if you have police fearful of engaging with somebody, a civilian, because of the weaponry that they have, that gun probably shouldn't be on the street. Right. I feel like that should be common sense, and I think there's a couple different things, where you have now, so you have people in Texas, this bill of oh, we're not going to allow kids at drag shows, as if that's some sort of a real problem that's happening across the country, where kids are being dragged to drag shows, not to sound redundant, right? But Like that's the ridiculousness of this. But then you have people who are watching this and they're saying, well, these are the most powerful people in our country. If they're taking the time to introduce a bill like this, it must mean that there's a problem, right? Or somehow that, transgender people are somehow like pedophiles as well, right? That being transgender is like a gateway to pedophilia, right? Like, and which again, no correlation whatsoever. But for anybody who's like a Bible thumper, the Catholic Church has been, a prominent place for pedophilia in this world, historically, right? But where's your issue with the church? So it's a lot of hypocrisy. But I believe the biggest blame, and everybody, obviously should own up to their own actions. This kid, should serve, this man, I should say, should serve his day in court and never be allowed to see daylight again. But, when you are looking at the people in power, they are preying upon disenfranchised people, right? And it's no different than like what a cult leader does, right? Cult leaders specifically look for certain people who are lacking something in their life, right? And are unfulfilled or have some sort of anger that they can't seem to point in a direction, right? They're unclear. And it's the same thing that Hitler did, with the Jews, where he gave people a target. This is why your problems are the way that they are, right? It's because of this group of people. So now we need to take care of them. And that's essentially what's happening now with the Republican Party, where it's the crazy socialist liberals that are destroying this country. They're communists. They want to turn this country into, communist China. And they're targeting people who are probably disenfranchised in some way. Many blue collar workers who maybe their career is beginning to dwindle because of technology advances and they no longer have a job. So they have to blame somebody, right? Or in general, you have like this fight against cancel culture, right? Because now the person who, maybe grew up being the dickhead jock in high school feels that the world is shunning them. But, now if we fight against cancel culture, they can go back to the bullying mentality that got them feeling powerful, right? And again, it's just hurting people at the end of the day. And it is these politicians, these newscasters preying upon people who are susceptible to their message in order to gain ratings, money, and power at the end of the day.
Dramos, you just kind of blew my mind in terms of putting them as cult leaders, because I think about it too. I'm like, that's also why they focus on these kinds of things rather than actual policy. Right. Because if you're making someone's life actually better by improving their working conditions, giving them better pay, giving them health care, then the only people they can blame are the people not actually working in their favor. Yep. But if they keep it focused on like, these are the people who's making life scary, and we're not going to change anything that would actually make your life better, so that you feel supported, so that you feel taken care of, so that you feel seen. Like, of course you're going to get angry and not know what to do with it. Also because let alone you have access to like support groups and therapy, let alone that, like, right. Like you're completely alone. Yeah. So like you turn that anger the only way, like they are pointing that quote unquote gun towards for you. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, and it's scary because it's not rooted in logic. I mean, to think that somebody like Donald Trump, who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, has born, into a real estate family and really never had to work a real day in his life, to think that he genuinely understands the plight of the, blue collar worker is just ridiculous in itself. Yet he somehow was able to fool them and give them, a target for their animosity and why they should be angry at the way the world is. Meanwhile, he's somebody who has enjoyed, paying less taxes than the middle class person. And essentially when doing that is pushing all of that, pressure as far as taxes being paid onto us, the middle class, right? So he is obviously doesn't give a shit about the everyday person and how many taxes that they're paying. No, he cares about his golf buddies and he himself enjoying tax breaks while the rest of us are paying more in taxes than these millionaires and billionaires, right? And he has these people fooled, that he is somehow the savior. Meanwhile, he's picking their pocket when they're not looking. Yeah. That just reminds me, like, even like the craziness that like Donald Trump raises so much money via grassroots. But like, for example, with Herschel Walker, he like supposedly raised a lot of money for Herschel Walker, and only Walker's campaign has only seen 10% of that. The rest has gone directly to Donald Trump and his friends. Or you look at the wall. I mean, Steve Bannon, who was a part of, Donald Trump's team, they had this whole, this whole donation thing to build a wall in Mexico. And Steve Bannon was pocketing that money, right? So
And you're taking it from people who I'm sure could be using that in other places, right? People who are struggling. I mean, it's the same thing with like, Joe Biden's infrastructure bill. And you have Republicans voting against something that would genuinely help the everyday person in their communities, many of which are impoverished, right? And even guns, right? Getting back to like this story of gun control. Like, I think we all probably could get behind the idea that maybe it should be harder to get a gun in this country, right? Like that you shouldn't be able to just show up, that there should be simple things like universal background checks so that every state has the same system to check, somebody's status as far as, them being eligible for buying a gun. And on top of that, like I said, I think we should all agree that the everyday person shouldn't be able to outshoot the police who are literally there to protect and serve. Yet, where most of us can probably agree to that logic, they allow the Republican Party to vote against any sort of reform or change and make them believe that the answer to this is actually putting armed security in schools or at grocery stores or having metal detectors or having locked doors, when once again, time and time again, we're seeing that doesn't work. That's not the actual answer. And if you look at the numbers, when Bill Clinton had the gun reform where it became stricter, shootings went down. And then as soon as it was allowed to expire under George Bush, they went back up, right? So like the numbers don't lie. And we see this around the world. You can compare, countries who have gone and made stricter gun laws, like the shootings have gone down dramatically. Yet, once again, people are being fooled by these people in power that they're entrusting their livelihood into. And these people are literally getting kickbacks from the NRA, and they're contributing to their campaigns and the corporations and all of the above. And it's just scary to me to think that, people are being fooled so easily and are unable to kind of see the truth of what's happening right now in our country.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's scary, it's heartbreaking, and it's like worth still fighting for it personally. I'm like always thinking about that.
You have to.
Yeah. And like thinking about all of thinking about even just like how we modify schools. Like I also am a tutor and educator. And so I work a lot in schools, and there's like times where I just think about like, also I'm like, yo, these are kids. There's a reason there's a classification of a child and an adult. And we're putting all the onus on changing the world that these kids live in versus being like an adult who is a fully formed human. Like that's the person who should actually be facing the consequences, as in like we should just like be like, yo, yeah, just like when I learned how to drive, I actually had to learn how to drive. Or if I have a pilot flying a plane, they have to go through training hours.
Sure.
Like, why can't we just be like, yeah, if I'm going to use something that could kill someone, and much less like even thinking about children who have to go through that, like I should have to learn how to use this properly, get my brain checked, and like go through these measures. But
instead, what they're doing is they're telling kids, learn how to evade a active shooter. And you, as a teacher who is grossly underpaid as is, you also need to teach children how to evade an active shooter, and you yourself need to be the leader. And we're gonna how about we just give a teacher a gun as well, right? Let's make the teacher be the cops somehow, some way.
Right, exactly. And then let alone that like the Second Amendment should supposedly protect people from like being able to use or not use a gun. Like not everybody should be like, Second Amendment doesn't exist that everybody should have a gun. Like, so like if your teacher's like, I can't do it, like what? Like they didn't sign up for that job.
Well, it's like in the idiocracy of the world that we live in, or the country specifically that we live in, that's the answer. Like the answer is giving people guns, is teaching little kids how to hide from somebody who potentially is going to come and kill them, rather than like being far stricter on the gun laws that potentially, could stop these shootings from happening. Like it just doesn't, it doesn't make any sense. And it just speaks to the current world that we're living in. And that the Republican Party is just really great at serving up lies, to their base, and they're just eating it up.
Right. Totally. Sorry. My dog is barking.
No, you're good.
He's like, there's a FedEx car.
Right. No worries.
Yeah. But yeah, no, 1,000%. And I think like it's really sad to see that people believe that over just thinking about like, hey, I have a kid, I have a niece or nephew.
Yep.
Like, and sometimes even like I'm like shocked that we need to get that far.
Right. Well, I think I don't understand where logic has sort of gone out the window, right? And it's sort of all become so divisive, and I think both sides, have some sort of ownership in that. But it's
Mhm.
gotten so divisive that rather than thinking for yourself and thinking with some sort of logic, you're just finding everybody's just trying to find ways to rationalize the political party that they support, right? So
Right.
nobody's is for the most part, and obviously I think it is worse on the right, but for the most part, people are just finding ways to co-sign the things that is being told to them, the talking points that are being told to them, and oftentimes with these people who commit acts of violence, or the Capitol rioters or these Trumpers or whatever it is, they're literally just spewing back verbatim the same talking points that were said on Fox News, right? They're not even creating their own original ideas to support why they believe what they do. They're literally just like regurgitating what is told to them, rather than actually thinking for themselves. And that is something I hope, we begin to wake up to as a country, because that's why you're seeing so much of it. Nobody's actually freely thinking for themselves, and asking questions, or saying, yeah, maybe I support this person, but why are they allowing this to happen? Maybe I should rethink what I'm doing. It's just a
Yeah.
really, really scary time period.
Right. And I think this is where like liberals and leftists can
Uh-huh.
like model this behavior.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, because I think about my friend. My friend was such a badass when her dad is a Trump supporter, or
Yeah.
was a Trump supporter. And she was like, I don't know how this person can support them, especially
Mm.
having raised like me,
Right.
like
Right.
with a very particular set of values. So she literally, like, she's a brilliant mind. So like not everyone can do this, of course, but
Yeah.
like she like took his arguments, like she was like, send me your proof, like send me your evidence, send
Right.
me what you're talking about so I can take a look at it. If you're going to claim this point, you have to back it up. So
Sure.
he sends her a bunch of stuff, and then she literally researches
Yeah.
like point for point, and then wrote him back and was like, Dad, this is what I found, let me
Yeah.
know what you think, but this is what I found. Like she
Sure.
was not afraid to like go into the nitty gritty of like, okay, if I'm asking him to challenge his views, I might need to do that work as well.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
then also back up my own point. Like, why am I saying this? Like,
Right.
I think it's a scary time. So everyone is kind of grasping onto what they want, or what
Right.
they have heard. And like the importance of just like, yeah, if I have the time, if I believe this, it's important. Like, especially if I'm asking this of others, how am I doing this for myself? If you have the privilege to, like, and I think
Right.
a lot of incredible minds and people who are middle class and higher do have the time or the space or the
Mhm.
resources to do some of that I think it's also important to model, like, because
Right.
it's like, if not, it's like, it's the like, fine, like, well, if you're not doing it, then why the fuck do I have to do it? And it's like,
Sure.
oh, so sometimes like we do have to model that behavior. And we have to be honest with ourselves sometimes when we're like, I'm not modeling it. Like,
Right.
let me go do that research, and then
Yeah.
we'll have this conversation.
Right. But I think to your friend's father's credit, being open enough, just like being open enough to uh hear the other side and see the points that they're making and the facts of why they believe that they do. And to her credit as well, that openness I think is the start of repairing all of this, right? And I think that that's what more people need to have an openness to, and to understanding that just because they believe something doesn't mean that they're necessarily right, or everything isn't necessarily the truth, and a lot of things are half truths, right? I think you see videos pop up all the time where like these political kind of comedians go to like Trump rallies and interview people to get like
Oh,
stupid
yeah.
content, right? But like the scary thing a lot of times is they'll say, okay, if you think Hillary Clinton committed some sort of like fraud, should she go to jail? Yes. If Donald Trump committed the same fraud, do you think he should go to jail? No. So that just shows you right there, like you're making this person like a messiah. You're making him,
That's true.
again, that's why the cult leader thing happens, where you can rationalize their wrongdoing, even if somebody else did it, that it would be wrong, right? So
Yeah.
that's, I think, again, when I try to put my like empathy cap on, and as a human being, all I would ask is have the openness to understand that maybe what you view as right or as factual, there could be something that proves that wrong, and be open to hearing the other side and then making, your own opinion based upon that information.
And also I think like, but to your point too, of like mentioning that,
Yeah.
like I'm like, and then also acknowledging when someone really is not exhibiting that behavior.
Right. Well, some people I think are lost causes, unfortunately. Like there just are who want to live in their own world and will never want to come around. And I'm not going to try and waste time, explaining to these people why they're wrong, because they're never going to want to believe it, right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, I don't think you should ever go into anything with trying to prove somebody wrong, because then that's kind of the wrong start from the beginning. But there are some people who you're just wasting your breath and wasting your time, because they are always going to psychotically find a way to rationalize, what this person is doing and what the party they support are doing, but those I think who, are a little bit more rational. I would love to see just a bit more openness to, a lot of these conversations. But all right, we gotten a lot off our chest when it comes to the politics of this world and all that's going on right now. We're gonna lighten things up a little bit in our Mi Gente segment and celebrate somebody who's doing some incredible things in a TV show in general, who I think is making great strides for the Latin community as a whole. So we'll do that. Mi Gente. All right, so I want to talk about something that's been incredible to see. You have the new Netflix show, Wednesday, which is obviously based off the Addams family. You have Jenna Ortega, a Latina, who is playing Wednesday. And obviously it's gotten crazy reviews. Everybody's talking about it. It actually set the record for Netflix's most viewed English language show in a week, with 341.23 million hours viewed, which actually was even more than Stranger Things season 4, which, obviously is one of Netflix's most popular shows and already has a built-in base. Wednesday, with its first season, already topped that. But beyond that, beyond Jenna Ortega being a Latina, it also is said in the show that she is Latin, right? She has a Latin family. They even dive into like the colonialism, right? And Native ancestry, and like her culture is not hidden, right? It's not just a Latin actress getting a big role. It's a Latin actress also representing her culture to a degree, and representing Latinos as a whole. And to see the gigantic response that it's gotten, and obviously it's not just Latinos watching the show with those numbers. I think it also proves a kind of Hollywood faux pas that always happens, that like if you have Latin leads that are actually perceived to be Latin and are telling a story from a Latin perspective, that it's not going to be universal enough to be successful. And I think a show like Wednesday kind of begins to break a lot of those barriers.
Yeah, represent. I'm so excited. I actually haven't seen it yet, but
okay.
I'm so psyched. I've watched clips.
Yeah.
And I always love that when we can be like characters in a world that's so out there too.
Yeah.
That I'm like, isn't this awesome to see? Also, it's the Addams family.
Right.
And she gets to be a weirdo.
Yeah.
And who also is still connected to her culture. All of this can exist in one thing, which is awesome. And the fact that the Addams family is like uber wealthy too. It's like breaking a lot of cool different perspectives or conceptions of us. And that just makes me happy. The more specific we can be in ourselves, in our culture, and our storytelling, the freaking universal it is. And that we can do that in so many different avenues, like not just like real stories about like real lives, but also fiction and fantasy.
Well, and I think to your point, she's not playing a stereotypical Latina role, right? It's like she's a goth girl, which I think for many people would have been like, oh, you're trying to be white, essentially, right? Like when you go with the stereotypes of what it means to be Latin, and obviously this show is all about breaking a lot of those barriers. But to me, that is something that I think was beautiful to see, that I picked up on, and that I think I resonated with a bit as well, because she's not playing some sort of stereotypical role, right? She isn't, acting in some sort of, trope that people think of Latinas. She's doing it in a way that is probably a lot of girls who grew up like emo or goth or liked punk music, whatever it was, can relate to that because they're finally seeing themselves in a character in a world that told them they're trying to be white, essentially.
Yes. And that's like so huge. I think like that was something, I think like Lizzo talks about this at one point where it's like, but it's like what we're expected to enjoy as people, as like Latinos or Black folk. Like there's some sort of expectation. Like I remember, like I grew up listening to everything. So I definitely went to Warped Tour. I definitely was like at punk rock and emo concerts, along with like Latin and along with like hip hop, like all of these things where it's just like to be able to be out loud and like very out there, like you can like all of these things are one thing is amazing and like
absolutely
so fulfilling to see. And I remember also too the original where like Gomez and Morticia were so in love with each other, and to like I think like the Addams family has that magical power almost to be like Latinos can be seen in a different like than the stereotypical light where it's like Morticia and Gomez are so in love and adore each other in their very particular way. And so I'm like, yes, that Wednesday is carrying on that tradition.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to see, especially the topic of conversation where Hollywood lacks a lot of diversity. I think it's beautiful to see something like this. And then, you know, you obviously attach Netflix to it and Tim Burton. And I think that even knocks the door down in such a bigger way. But let's not talk about your podcast, right? Because I think you're breaking a lot of doors down with this show, which I love the concept. I loved it since the first time you were telling me about it. We kind of alluded to at the beginning of the show. You were part of this program called the Next Up program, right? For iHeart, where they were giving people an opportunity to bring their podcast idea to life, right? And myself and a bunch of other people from iHeart, like we all kind of gave different talks. And then eventually we were paired up with different podcast creators. And I was your mentor, quote unquote. So it's beautiful because I remember you pitching me the original idea, sending me some of the original cuts that you had, me giving you feedback. And then now to see full circle, we're on the same podcast network and your first episode just dropped this week, I think is such a beautiful, beautiful thing. So first and foremost, congratulations to you and the hard work that you put into this. It's incredible to see. When You Were Invisible, anybody who obviously is a new podcast. So tell people about it. A lot of people probably aren't familiar with it yet.
Yeah, so it's what I call my love letter to the working class and people who have been othered in like Western American society. And it like really stemmed from like my family and my journey of like what it's like to be first gen Latina. And we moved around a lot. We were on the East Coast, we were in the Midwest. And as like we've talked about, like my parents are now in the South. So I got to see how perception of me shifted based off of where I was and how different communities treated me and how communities were treated. And like, we're now middle class. Like my parents are definitely middle class, but we started off on food stamps and we started off in an immigrant community and like, then went to like a white community and a Black community. So like I hopped around so much and saw so many people who were working their asses off or like working crazy hours just to make it work or to take care of a family and who lived with such like generosity in many ways. And like my first episode, I talked to one of the guys who was one of my mentors while I was at Columbia, who was a mailroom worker. Like he was the one who was like, you made it to an Ivy League on a scholarship. Like one, you represent Latinos and two, you represent us. Like you represent the people who wouldn't have had this opportunity. And like, what are you doing with your time and how can we help you feel connected, feel grounded, feel yourself, and then like let things go. So to me, it's really honest and open conversations with people from different walks of life. So I talked to a lot of Latinos, I talked to a lot of first gen people, but I also have an episode with a woman from white working class rural US, like Pennsylvania. And being like, hey, you're not a Trump supporter. What is it like to be in this layer? And what have you gone through in your life? And so there's like a lot of variety. And it's really about like kind of getting to the heart of trying to connect with one another and all the different like walks of life we have in this country. And also just being like, how do we become generous and how do we become willing to have conversations that are hard and putting my own bias and perspectives and perceptions out there. Of like, oh, I might have been wrong. I may have walked in with an assumption about you that is
Sure.
wrong? And how do I own up to that so that we can have a stronger connection, or like decide it doesn't work? So to me, yeah, it's an incredible opportunity to get to know people, to get to know the US, and also just like give a lot of love and thanks and appreciation to the people who aren't seen most of our time, like who aren't with clout, wealth, or power.
Right. Well, I that's what I kind of found really interesting, especially when we're talking about the podcast world, because it's particularly become very much like every celebrity now has a podcast, right? And that, while it's great because it brings attention to the world of podcasting and makes it, more of a sustainable business and a real, part of media, at the same time, it also, I think, takes away from the everyday person, which I think is what podcasting was so great about. It took away that barrier to entry of like radio or television had, right? Anybody could do it and put it up there and hopefully gain a following doing so. And particularly like the name of the game for a lot of podcasts to grow is like, let me go run and get somebody famous on here and hopefully they shout it out and now I get their followers, right? But I thought it was really beautiful and earnest to actually highlight like the everyday person who is their own superhero, is their own like celebrity in their world, is doing something amazing. And maybe it's not going to initially be the thing that draws people in as far as like having a big name, but you're telling a very important story that is far bigger than just the numbers, right? Is far bigger than just the fame that might come along from having a particular person on your show. And I just thought that was really beautiful to kind of see some of that, I guess, selflessness to a degree from you.
Thank you. I am not where I am without the people who helped me get here, like including you. Like I remember like your note was always like, find the heart. You're getting closer to the heart. Like, where's the heart? And just being like, yeah, we are where we are often because of the interactions we have with others, whether it's on a systemic level and like what the country or your state provides, or whether it's on a day-to-day, your neighbors, your family. And to me, that's something that I think that's the magic of every day. And that's the magic of most lives. Like most of us don't get to be celebrities, even though that's incredible. And I love hearing about that. And I love hearing about process and different worlds that get access to through that way. But like, for me, that was really valuable and important. And I think like it is going to be very much thanks to the audience and the listeners and people who want to hear each other that this podcast is going to potentially succeed. Not because there's a name attached. Because like right now I'm pretty much a nobody in many ways, and that to me is really beautiful. Like it's a quiet wave, I think, that's gonna has the potential to rise and to help many ships float.
I think that it also brings a bit of presence, right? Because I think we're all moving so fast. We're all, have a bird's eye view to the lives of the wealthy or the famous and whatever, via social media and things like that, that it's easy for us to kind of take for granted the everyday people that we interact with and the fact that everybody has a story to tell, right? And everybody deserves to be heard and celebrated in some way, shape, or form, right? Anybody who's doing anything good is deserving of their story to be told, right? I mean, the one episode you were talking about with the guy who worked in the mailroom at your college, the reality is, he's like an unsung hero in the world, but he had a profound effect on you, right? And that's like a domino effect, whether you have an effect on one person or a million people, like he's a part of that story. He's weaved into that beautiful kind of narrative that you are now passing along, to somebody else, right? And for me, that was like the beauty of mentorship and why I try to be that way for anybody who reaches out, as much as I can with my time. But I always see it in that way, that if you're connected to these people's stories who you're influencing or you're inspiring or you're giving a note to, right? And like, you don't know where that's going to go on to. And the beauty is like, we're all kind of weaved together in that fabric. So there's something so special about that.
Thanks. Yeah. I think it's incredibly special. And I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm excited to have people listen to these stories. I also just love hearing things that I don't know about, like completely different perspectives or like life experiences I have no clue about. Like, I'm like, that is so valuable and what it can teach us or just enjoy. And yeah, I'm like really excited to see where it goes. I also love like the potential of getting to do more episodes.
Yeah.
Because like what I want to do and how I want to continue growing is like also be like, hey, audience, hey, listener, yo, do you have a story you want to share?
Right.
You know someone in your community who's an unsung hero? Like share them with us so that we can like actively grow together and be like, let's celebrate these people as a team.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, so I'm really excited, and I'm so grateful to have had you like be a part of this journey, and like, and then being on here, like, yeah, again, like we don't have celebrities attached, so like you are my celebrity attached, just by like giving me this opportunity, you know, to chat and share with the people you've connected with, and all the work you have done. Like, you're an incredibly hard worker, and
I appreciate that. Like, yeah, it's beautiful. It really is. I think it's a special thing, and I appreciate your your pat on the back there. I don't do well with compliments, but I do appreciate it. But I just think it's amazing. I encourage anybody to go and check this out. I think that there was something really beautiful to just like learn about somebody that was the everyday person, but learning that there was something incredibly fascinating about each and every one of us. And I remember that was like my takeaway from, you know, when you were sending me early cuts and things like that, where I was like, wow, I'm like really invested in this, and there's no attachment to it as far as like, you know, some like celebrity lifestyle or whatever it is, or you know, grandiose like world thing like politics or something like that. It's just genuinely an everyday person that I might pass on the street every day. And it's amazing to me and inspiring to me to hear that they have a story that is so interesting to tell if they were just given the opportunity, right? And I think that it humanizes all of us, and you know, it really just connects us all in such a beautiful way. So When You're Invisible, the first episode is out right now. It drops every Monday, you said?
Yep, every Monday.
Beautiful. And what's your socials and all that so people can follow you?
Yeah, totally. So When You're Invisible podcast is the social on IG for the podcast. And then my personal social is also where I promote. It's a little crazy because I made this before I had the forethought of like being accessible. So it's actually very, very Latin. It's Marifer, so Marifer. So it's a truncation of my two names, and then underscore Diez, my last name, which is Diez, underscore B, because it's like the initial for my second last name.
Sure.
That, like, you know, teenage Marifer was like, I must be taken seriously, so I have to have my name and not a handle. And also must pay homage to all my Latinidad. Like, it was like very dramatic. But When You're Invisible podcast is the easiest way to find us.
Love it. I'll put all the links to that in the show notes to make it easier for everybody. Maria, it's been amazing getting to catch up with you. I'm so excited for you to go out on this journey. And man, just congratulations again. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. I want you to be present to the moment. You know, I have trouble doing that. So I always try to encourage people, when you have a big accomplishment like this, you've worked so hard for a year, like I said, for this first episode to even come out in this way. Give yourself the ability to just bask in the moment and appreciate how far you've come and be proud of yourself.
Thank you.
Of course. Man, big shout out to my guest this week, Maria Diez, host of the new podcast, When You're Invisible. Man, I'm just so happy to see people out there living their dreams, and I couldn't be prouder of the fact that I got to be a part of that story, even if it was just in the smallest bit. Now, with that said, we normally would be doing our Ask a Gringo segment here, but I'm going to be honest, y'all. You know when you make a post and then you put it up, but you forget to send it, and then like you realize half the day is gone by the time you posted it? That's kind of what happened to me yesterday. I made the post, then it got posted way later than I expected, and unfortunately a lot of people didn't see it. So we're going to have to skip the Ask a Gringo segment this this week. Maybe I'll do like a little bonus one. I'll leave it up, and if we get some good answers, I'll try to put it up on the next episode as a little bonus. But man, yeah, I messed up a little bit on that one this week, y'all. And Instagram was not pushing it right away. So a little bit Instagram's fault, a little bit of my fault. I just, I do this all the time, sadly, with my stories. But so we'll have to skip Ask a Gringo this week. So without further ado, let's tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for Conclusion Stew.
All right, so we'll kind of go through everything quickly. I know this was a longer episode. We really dove into stuff. I really enjoyed the conversation with Maria and her perspective. But, we started in Georgia, where the Senate runoff is happening between current Senator Raphael Warnock and the Trump-backed challenger in Herschel Walker. I think for me, the way that I would sum this up, and again, trying to appeal to the rational Republicans out there, because they do exist. Herschel Walker is an example of how little the Republican Party thinks of its voters, right? The fact that they think they can send this person out there who can barely string two coherent sentences together, but they know that blindly the Republican supporters will just go out there and vote for him, right? So they don't actually even have to try when it comes to, helping bring up a candidate who would actually do something for the people of Georgia, right? And that's what I want, Republicans who are voting, anybody in Georgia, and as a whole, look at what your party is doing. They are taking you for granted. They are putting people out there who are not qualified to lead in any capacity, let alone be the senator for a large state like Georgia. Again, they are calling you fools by putting candidates like this out there. They are placating to people of color and just throwing, a black man up there and thinking you're going to blindly vote for him just because of the fact that he is black, regardless of the fact that he has zero policies to actually help out the people of Georgia. And again, I understand maybe you don't like everything that the Democrats are doing, but by voting for someone like Herschel Walker, you are just co-signing the Republicans half-assing, bringing actual real candidates that would change something in your life, right? By voting for the Republican Party, you are just supporting them, not really giving a shit about you or what happens to, the places that you call home. Again, they threw a candidate like Herschel Walker out there because they knew their following. They were hoping at least that they're following the MAGA supporters, the Republicans as a whole. They just figured all they have to do is throw a body out there who claims to be a Republican, and we can win this thing. And that's a terrible, terrible way to appoint someone who has the power to really have a positive or negative impact on a lot of people. So I really, again, appeal to those rational Republicans out there and think about what you're co-signing with a vote for somebody like Herschel Walker. Now, quickly touching on Donald Trump, because I think everything that needs to be said has been said. I think you are the product of the people that you find yourself around, right? And somehow, some way, Donald Trump keeps finding people like Nick Fuentes, Holocaust deniers and white nationalists, people like that, like Nick Fuentes. They somehow end up consistently in the orbit of Donald Trump, right? So regardless of the fact that Donald Trump knew who Nick Fuentes was, if he was blindsided by Kanye bringing random guests, either way, I think it just speaks to the fact that Donald Trump continues to find people like this in his orbit. And I think it says a lot about his character, why terrible, disgusting people like Nick Fuentes are so attracted to people like Donald Trump. I've heard many people throughout the course of these last few years, talk about how they're hurt that, people think I'm racist just because I support Donald Trump. Well, guess what? When you are floating around in the orbit of someone who is supporting bigoted ideas and calling certain groups of people rapists or drug dealers, right? And is getting cosigns from people like Nick Fuentes or the head of the KKK. Guess what? You are now in bed with those same people. And maybe you yourself don't share all of those same ideas, but by you co-signing this nonsense, by you co-signing having this person in power, you in fact do bear some of the burden of the racism that is being spewed out there as a result of a person like Donald Trump being put into power and having a large platform, a large supportive base like he does. There's no way around that. And that leads perfectly into what we saw with this shooting at the nightclub in Colorado, right? Club Q, which is a queer nightclub, where it's just devastating to see somebody bringing their hate into action in this way and senselessly taking the lives of 5 people and wounding at least 18 others. Thank goodness for the 2 heroes, Richard M. Fierro and Thomas James, who are both veterans. Thank God they were there that night and subdued him, or more people probably would have died. But again, one life is too many, and there are grieving families who lost their loved ones for no reason whatsoever. And we have to think about that, and there are a lot of people to blame. There are the people who are in positions of power in politics in this country and are not voting to create stricter gun laws, who are not voting to outlaw, things like AR-15s, which are incredibly powerful rifles that no civilian needs to have. On top of that, there are the media, the people on television who are spewing hate towards the LGBTQ plus community and making it seem like they are here to destroy the lives of everyone else, right? And that transgender people are somehow pedophiles and all of the other nonsensical talking points that are happening because of right-wing media that is stirring the pot, that is activating people who obviously have mental health issues, but they're not being helped by those that they follow on television, telling them that they are at war against the radical left and this queer agenda that is happening. Apparently, all of those talking points and things like Donald Trump and these politicians that are creating all of these laws, the Florida bill for Don't Say Gay, like all of these politicians also have blood on their hands because they are creating an issue that's not really there, and they are activating groups of people who are not well and making them feel like this is the answer to their problems. And then again, the mental health crisis in this country, can't be ignored. And the fact that mental health isn't something that is universally covered for everyone, is disgusting because it is something that affects all of us, right? People like this can go out, buy a gun, and ruin somebody's life forever, and beyond that, take somebody's life and then ruin their family's life, right? It's just really terrible. And the Republicans will always blame this on mental health, somebody who's mentally ill. Well, if that is the case, what are you doing to correct that problem? What are you doing to provide aid for those who suffer from mental health? And the answer is nothing. It's just another excuse to deviate from the guns that are causing, these murders, and to deviate from having to actually do something about that in order for them to keep collecting checks from the NRA. And it's just really sad that we live in a country like this that, is valuing money and power over the lives of innocent people, and that, people who are queer are going to the one safe place that they thought they had. And even there, living their life, not hurting anybody in their very safe space that it's supposed to be of a queer nightclub. Even there, they're getting harassed and sadly being slaughtered for no reason. There's no other way to put it. I hate that word slaughter, but I think we need sometimes graphic words like that to really drive home just how terrible instances like this one are. Now, on the lighter side of things, man, Netflix and the show Wednesday, Jenna Ortega absolutely murdered the character of Wednesday Addams. And again, what was amazing about this was it wasn't just a Latina leading a role. It wasn't just a Latina, playing a character that claims to be Latina. It was all of the above, plus really actually celebrating the culture throughout the course of the show. Again, from the talk of colonization and the indigenous people and, the quote unquote weirdos in the show were the people of color, represented the people of color and the indigenous people, all of the different nuances to it. And the fact that everybody was very obviously who they were. She was obviously Latina, her parents were, and they honor that lineage and that conversation. I thought it was just super well done. And the fact that it broke records, that Stranger Things had set, which is a show that is 4 seasons in at this point, I think speaks to, just how incredible the story was, but also goes to show that you can have a character leading that is of Latin descent and also represents Latin culture, and it still be universal enough that the rest of the world can enjoy it. And I think this show proves that, and hopefully we see more and more, because as I've spoken about a lot, there is an issue with diversity in Hollywood. Latin stories are not being told in a diverse way. And also, she's a goth girl, a Latin goth girl, right? And I think so many people like myself who grew up, being told that a lot of the music that I was into was quote unquote white music. I need to stop being white. I think that this makes a lot of us feel seen in the fact that, you know, we are not a monolith. There is no right way to be Latin, just like we all know that on this show. And I think Wednesday Addams is a beautiful kind of symbol of that for everybody that listens to this podcast, who I think shares in that mindset in some sort of way. So with that said, man, thank y'all so much for tuning into today's episode. Big shout out to Maria Diez for hopping on the show. When You're Invisible, the new podcast, please go check that out. I'm really proud of all the work that she's been doing. Really honored to have been a part of that and to see how far it's come, man. A year in the making. A really just testament to anybody out there who's striving to make your dreams come true, your ideas come to life. Understand that patience and hard work, and sometimes it takes a little while for it to happen. But you know, her story is an example, one of why you should keep pushing. I just think it's a beautiful moment, and again, I'm just so happy to have been a part of her story here. Now with that said, Dramos.com for merch. Leave us a review, like, share, subscribe, wherever you listen. Spotify lets you like now, I think, or give it a star rating. So please, you know, help us out. All that stuff helps us get onto the playlist and, you know, gets us features to help grow the show. I know I sound like a broken record when I say that, but it's real. And that's it, man. Have a great weekend, and I'll catch y'all on Tuesday with a brand new episode. Until then, stay safe. Peace.